Hi, I'm so lucky to be sitting here in London with Judy from the Refuge in Florida. Judy, it's so good to see you. How are you?
I'm good, John. I'm so happy to see you.
I know you're over here for the UKSAT conference, but I'd really like you to tell us and to the people watching this a little bit about the Refuge, if you could.
The Refuge is 11 years old, and we started the Refuge because we recognized that people were chronically relapsing in substance abuse and process addictions, and we know the 12 steps works, and we recognized that there was something else going on, and we started looking at the trauma piece, which is very important. It's core for most human beings. So we wanted to find out what it was in their lives that was creating this need to medicate, and we started creating this wonderful program that really investigates trauma and how that impacts a person's life. And so we've been very successful in helping folks to walk through their trauma story and to recreate a new story.
I have been really blown away. We actually met for the first time probably a year ago or so, something like that. I knew of you before because of people that you knew. And one of the things that I never really understood was how trauma that happened so long ago in childhood affect somebody 40, 30, 50 years later and actually be a really kind of debilitating event in their lives. And I've got personal experiences. You saved my wife's life, and that was kind of a very emotional thing for me. I remember being at the Refuge and crying for 4 days. So I know the kind of work you go through. How can you help people identify that trauma is a problem?
I think if we can look at what it is, what's the message that drives me? What's the one thing that in my life is always repeated? So, for instance, for me, it was kind of a double message. It's I'm never going to be good enough. Now, that's a message that came really early in my life as a child. And I know my mother didn't mean for me to have that message, but that was the message I heard. On top of that was, when I was successful, it was, who do you think you are? So that double message of, you're not good enough, but then who do you think you are, was so paralyzing to me. Because I would start to be successful and immediately create a failure for myself because of the message. Now, as a child, that didn't even make sense to me, but I watched that process happen over and over and over again for me. Now, that's just a simple message. What if the message is one of neglect and abandonment, where every single day of your life you're told something that might be, you're stupid. You're never going to amount to anything. Or you're fat. I'm so tired of you being in my life. You should never have been born. I'm so sorry that I had you. Well, those are really strong messages. And when you receive that as a child, that's a message that cannot be erased. Can't be erased. It's there. It's ingrained. So even when you're an adult of 25 or 45, you may not realize it, but that message is still there in the back of your head. And so when something goes wrong, there's a voice in your head that says, oh, you're so stupid. And we say that to ourselves.
We do. I can really understand that. One of the difficulties that I had to overcome was that when people gave me well-meaning advice, and from a great place, I think it was constructive criticism.
Right.
I heard, you're useless.
Yes.
You can't do this. You shouldn't even be in here.
Exactly.
Go away and let me do it. It took me a long time, and I didn't understand it until I spoke to your wonderful staff and you, and learning from Sandra on her return as a refugee, how I could actually process that.
Yeah.
And it's been life-changing. There's that little simple thing that everybody misses.
Now, suppose it's something even more dramatic than that. Suppose it's sexual abuse. Suppose that 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 that you've been sexually abused by someone who's supposed to be a caretaker, someone who's supposed to be looking out for your spirit, your soul, your body, your being, and that person is betraying your trust. And on top of that, your body betrays you because it feels good too. What is that supposed to do to a child? How's a child supposed to process that and then move on in their life? You know, we start to medicate in some way or another, and it might be with food, it might be, you know, many things. It might, you know, it might be that we experience depression, and that becomes a kind of medication, or anxiety becomes a kind of medication. Or as a child, maybe we start to masturbate because that becomes some release. Now that's a pretty powerful statement, that at 6 or 7 years old, that I was sexually abused. We stuff that down, we don't talk about it, it becomes this huge secret, and that child is expected to carry that secret, oftentimes with the threat. But if you tell, well, how does someone grow up with that message and become a self-sustaining human being?
The experience that I have, and I've seen it in others, is that they actually don't grow up.
No.
You know, they have this ability to stop, and of course, then comes the addiction, because I can't deal with this feeling. I'm going to cover it with that feeling. Right. And I've seen people go to treatment for alcoholism and addiction and try and deal with just that portion of it, come out and relapse.
Yes,
because that bit hasn't been touched.
Exactly. And what I'd like to tell people is, you can go to treatment for your disease, for your alcoholism, for your substance abuse, and get clean and sober. But that uncomfortability that you feel, that you've been medicating, remains there. And so it will build and build and build. I have seen people with 10 and 12 years sober be ready to commit suicide because they can no longer maintain that stability, because the feeling is so intense about what they haven't dealt with. And so they get a couple of choices. They can go crazy, they can commit suicide, or they can relapse. And the truth is, relapse becomes the sanest option. And that can happen, you know, immediately after treatment, which is what you see when you see people chronically relapsing and going back and forth to treatment. Or it can be that angry drunk in a meeting that you see who hasn't dealt with the core issues, but remains angry, sober but angry, or sober and depressed, or sober and anxious, because there's something else there that has to be dealt with. And so that sobriety is not 100% the gift that it could be when you deal with the cores.
I get that. I mean, one of the things that at Ark we've learned, and kind of we've learned it from you and your wonderful staff, is that when we're doing interventions, our data collection better be good. Because if our data collection is off and we do the wrong kind of intervention with a trauma sufferer, we're going to just re-traumatize them.
Exactly.
And we've worked really hard, and we've had the support that we've learned. We've just learned that we do it so differently. With our data collection indicating any way that there is a trauma sufferer at this intervention, the intervention changes. I'll clear everyone out the room, and we will do it in such a gentle, loving, caring way.
Yes.
And fortunately, you've seen us do that, see how that works.
Right.
It's life-changing stuff. You know, we've learned about the traumatic addiction, you know, the underlying causes. We've learned, and we teach about something called traumatic entitlement, where we have very wealthy children of very wealthy parents who have been removed from love by money and enablement. And perhaps you could talk a bit about that.
It is probably one of the most difficult things to work with, for this reason. Because of the entitlement, because of the money, clients that we get in that mode, they have very few skills because they haven't had to develop them. They haven't developed coping mechanisms because everything's been paid for and taken care of. They haven't been able to deal with the core issue, which is that total lack of love, because love looks like money looks like love, and when we know that that's not the case. And you know, as I've said before to you, inside everyone who is suffering is this lonely little boy and this lonely little girl that just aches for love. And if we don't get that ability to be loved, then we don't know how to love. And we don't know how to be in relationship. And so consequently, you know, we have a society that really struggles with relationships.
Of course, we've worked with some young men who have been particularly entitled. And I've seen that one young man with his father talking about using prostitutes. And that's his idea of buying love.
Right.
And there's a part of me that wants to jump in and say, what the heck are you doing? But there's a bigger part that says, hang on a second. Number one, I'm not qualified to do that.
Right.
And the second thing is, there's a whole cultural thing going on there that I'm not aware of.
Exactly.
And I have to just stand back and go, right, I'll put that in the back. I'll remember that, and that'll go in our data collection.
Exactly.
And when we do this, we'll hand that file over to you, and you guys can unravel that onion.
I mean, we have to pay attention to the cultural piece because, we get folks from all over the world. And some things that in the U.S. we wouldn't even consider, coming from another country, we really must be aware that, number one, we don't make judgment. We don't expect our therapists to make judgments, and they don't. But in terms of that whole piece with prostitutes, I have recognized that oftentimes when I have someone who's coming in who has been engaged with prostitutes, sometimes they're buying prostitutes just to be held.
Yeah.
Just to be held. That is the incredible need of every human being for love and for touch. And we live in an environment where we are skin hungry for touch. And to me, that speaks of how important our ability to love one another is. And we can only teach that by healing those trauma wounds. We can only teach love by healing the trauma wounds.
I mean, it's a wonderful job that all of you guys do. I want to talk about your wonderful refugees. They're a breed apart.
Yeah.
And I've been fortunate. I've signed as a refugee, as you know. And the care that they give each other.
Yes.
Is that taught? Is that something you explain that they've got to do?
It is. I think it's innate. It's innate with what happens in their groups and what happens in the community. I think it's because our therapists our therapists have their phones, and so when an alumni calls, our refugees call, our therapists are on top of it. They know. I know where most of my alumni are. They know that they can call me, or they can email, or they can Facebook me, and if they're in trouble, they don't hesitate to call, because number one, if they're in trouble, they have no shame around calling us and telling us they're in trouble. I just had lunch with one of our alumni over here in London, and the first thing we talk about are other refugees.
Yeah.
And we have another refugee who's getting married in July here in London, and how excited he was for her and how much they've stayed in contact. And when one refugee is in trouble, I get a phone call, and they will say to me, you need to go and scoop somebody up because this and this and this is happening. Mm-hmm. And there's power in that. I mean, there's power because ultimately the intimacy that they develop in being able to share with one another their deepest, darkest secrets for the first time is what creates the ability to love one another, because they have empathy and compassion that they had never experienced before. And so, I mean, I love that happens. I love that our refugees, they come together. We have refugee events all the time. We have a big event coming up on Memorial Day in a couple of weeks. And I honestly think, yes, they come to be at the Refuge because it's this wonderful, beautiful, healing environment in the middle of the forest, but they come to be with one another too.
It's lovely. I mean, one of the last things I want to just touch on, and it's something I learned from you guys, is the whole process of reparenting and understanding that reparenting. It doesn't necessarily mean you had bad parents in the beginning. No. But it's just a process of peeling back the onion and rebuilding the onion to a degree. Could you explain that?
You know, we are asked to take a driving test to have a driver's license. We are asked to get licenses for any number of things, but no one ever teaches us how to parent. And so the assumption is that everyone who has a child knows how to parent, and that's not the truth. They don't. And so when we talk about reparenting, it's not because there was malice from a parent, but it's because perhaps they just hadn't been parented well themselves and they don't know how. So what we're asking our folks to do, and what we try to do with them, is is to be the mother that they didn't have, or for them to find the father that they didn't have among their peers, or with a therapist. And in that process, learning how to be to themselves the parent that they didn't have. You know, Sandra will talk about carrying the baby doll around that she did.
Sure, yeah.
And that was really important and powerful because she had to carry little Sandra around and know what it was like to reparent that child. And it was a powerful experience. And I have had big, burly men carrying dolls around because they needed to understand what it meant to have a loving relationship with that child and to be able to do that for themselves.
It's awesome. You, just to finish up with, you've changed my life, you've changed Sandra's life, you've changed our family's life. And what I love is that it's the invisible families that you change. You know, we don't see you shouting from the rooftops that you've done this, that, and the other, but I'm going to do it because you do a wonderful job, Judy. Judy, it's just a joy and a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you.